Welcome back. W around here in the aftermath of the Stanley Cup Championship for the Caps and the resignation of Barry Trotz. I will be getting to that at some point later on in our broadcasting here, but I have my head down on the Orioles and my Dear Orioles series that begins this week. This guy has been writing about the Orioles for the better part of 2 decades, going back to his time at the Washington Times. He is a baseball fan, a baseball insider, a baseball business insider at Sports Business Journal. He is one of the more decorated guys on the inside of all things of the Masson dispute of over $400 million. It's been a little while since I've had Eric Fisher on. You can follow him out at Sports Business Journal as well as out on Twitter at Eric Fisher, that's FISHERSBJ for Sports Business Journal. Good day to you, Eric. There's a lot of baseball being played in the country, none that matters in Baltimore for the rest of the summer, dude. These are tough times, and this is a tough circumstance for the organization right now with Peter's health in question and all this disputed money and last place and $130 million owed to Chris Davis, as well as the pending gloom and doom around Machado and Adam Jones as well.
Yeah, it was. It's really kind of unfortunately at that low ebb right now. You guys had that really good run between 12 and 16, 3 playoff runs. Winning his team in the American League. It's going to probably go down as one of those good eras of Orioles baseball, even though it didn't culminate in a World Series championship. Now, teams obviously at the other end of the cycle, and they've got to rebuild, and they've got to get mass amounts of bodies in to try to throw some stuff in against the wall and see what happens. But it just Tigers have been through this. Other clubs have been. Royals are sort of getting down to that point where you kind of have to break it up and start all over again. So. That's unfortunately where you guys are at right now.
All right, well, in saying that and doing that, you and I have many, many times talked about how unorthodox this ownership has been in so many ways. Inside baseball circles, a bit of a pariah. Certainly, that was even before he sued all of his partners. And it was a co-joined, in-joined, entangled. I don't know. You're the lawyer around here, Eric. You tell me. But, now on top of that, you have this Brady Anderson situation. You have this dysfunction of having had a general manager who tried to leave 3 years ago, and you kept him around. You don't sign international players or last names of players you can't pronounce in Asia or in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a strange place, and it's not going to attract top talent, in my opinion.
Well, but right now really shouldn't be. The team is not in a position where they should be going out looking for top-tier free agent veteran talent. What they need is a whole large-scale infusion of youth. And, this is where the Machado thing comes in, that if you can turn him into 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 guys and try to see what kind of sticks against the wall and who develops, particularly on the pitching front. And that's really where a lot of the issue is, that there's just not a lot of frontline pitching prospect talent. And try to see what comes together. They need mass bodies right now more than anything else. Not a free agent star.
But I think the hardest part is who makes the decisions, right? Like we always talk about the Jed Hoyers and the Theos and the geniuses, and clearly Andy McPhail was a baseball genius around here in turning this thing around and deodorizing something that had stunk for a decade and a half. And even in the aftermath, he didn't get any of the glory. He was gone before it all happened. Mike Flanagan was also gone before it all happened. And he didn't live through that here to see it get better, but it got better because they were making better decisions and picking better baseball players. Boy, who picks your players really matters, and having the right talent there is probably the most important part of all of this, because if you're not picking the right players, you're not drafting the right players, you're not identifying the right players, you're not identifying the right teachers, the right coaches, the right development people, you're never going to win in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you look at some of these things in isolation, that when Chris Davis was signed and had come off a couple of huge home run seasons and so on and so forth, that okay, that's the going rate for a prime level slugger. You kind of have to do it, and that's completely gone upside down. You look at Alex Cobb and Onsukwagi gets some, veteran talent late in the off season. You get sort of a value play. It's been awful. And so you look at some of these things, and at the time they seemingly made sense, and they've just, they've continued to roll snake eyes on a lot of these things.
The Masson deal, and look, it's not popular, it's not sexy. Only you and I talk about it. No one else even knows it's going on. 99.9% of the Orioles fan base is asleep on it. But it's $400 million, and it will greatly affect the future of both of these franchises in the near short term in regard to Bryce Harper, in regard to setting budgets, in regard to if the Angelos boys need to stroke a $380 million check, where that money's coming from, and whether they've stored that money up like a squirrel, and at what point that would get paid. But you are of the mindset that the Nationals are going to recoup some money here at some point, right? Like at some point, they're going to get some money, right?
Well, I think at some point there needs to be some sort of resolution so everybody can move on more than anything else, because we're still really kind of in this holding pattern where the original decision, the original internal baseball arbitration decision in favor of the Nationals, that's gone away. And then there was another decision where, so that's the first one, that's just gone. So right now, the question is now where does this thing go to be resolved and litigated? And the standing decision from the court is that it goes back to baseball again, which the Orioles and Masson are now appealing, and we're still kind of just in this holding pattern. But you've got two sides that are completely dug in here. We're still in this holding pattern. But the big thing that we're kind of watching is what, and I just don't have a clear sense on this yet, is what, if any, change comes in this situation with the Nationals' recent change in their ownership structure. They made a change at owners' meetings recently where the son, Mark Lerner, is now taken over for the father, Ted Lerner, as the designated control executive for the Nationals.
Now, they have to vote on that, though, right? So if the Angelos boys were to say, Mom and the boys are going to run the team, you guys have a vote on that, they might not get a vote on that, might they, right? Like, the gods of baseball might not let John and Lou be in charge, right? Like, they would have to vote on that.
Well, yeah. In the case of the Orioles, in any of these franchise situations, yes, they have to be voted on. And in the case of the Nationals switch from Ted to Mark, that was unanimously approved. So even the Orioles voted in favor of that. My expectation at this point is really that it's more or less status quo, because the driving, even though Ted's been okaying all of these moves for the Nationals all these years, one of the sons-in-law, Ed Cohen, has really been the driving force for the club in the whole Masson fight, and he's been the one kind of running point for Washington on this whole thing. And he hasn't gone anywhere, obviously. So my expectation is that we're just still going to continue on this slow march until some sort of resolution comes together. And it just, it's been God, how many years? But this has always been the thing that they're just so dug in on both sides. And I know Manfred's been frustrated on this, but at some point you would think, like, enough already. Let's try to find some sort of common ground here. But that has not happened.
We are chatting with Eric Fisher. He is Eric Fisher, SBJ, out on Twitter. That stands for Sports Business Journal. He's one of the insiders for baseball and Major League Baseball, and covering the business of baseball and how this all unfolds. And, part of the business of baseball for the Orioles this summer is going to be unloading Machado and trying to get young talent, unloading Britt and Brock. I don't know if this is going to happen. Put on your baseball fan hat here as we get up on the trading deadline and try to figure out what kind of a deal will be worked out. I think the fan base here has thought, well, they're going to get a king's ransom for Manny Machado. I haven't found anybody on the national side that believes that's going to be the case.
Yeah, he's really kind of the prime guy on the market, but he's obviously coming up to his free agency, so it's a rental. It is a rental deal in the classic sort of sense. But we've seen, Aroldis Chapman was a rental and came right back to the Yankees and still yielded Gleyber Torres on the other side. So you would think even in the case of a rental that should be able to yield at least one A grade prospect, a B grade prospect, and maybe a C, 2 Cs or something like that. But there should be at least one A grade prospect coming back for Machado.
And what if there's not, though? Then you take the draft pick? I mean, that would be a little bit embarrassing for the organization, right? To sort of go to the end of term with Machado and never get anything, right? Like, they almost have to do something to save face and take the best deal that's on the table. But I don't know that the best deal on the table is going to be a wow deal. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, and you are correct that the baseline would be that you're essentially talking about a pick between the first and second round. It's much more complicated in turn. It's not as straightforward as it used to be in the prior CBA, that if he got a qualifying offer, then there would be automatically a pick coming back. There's a number of provisions, but Machado would hit a lot of those because he'll get a big deal in the off season, above $50 million, and so on and so forth. But the baseline for that would be a pick somewhere in the mid-30s overall for the Orioles, assuming he walks in the off season. So the idea is to get above and beyond that kind of baseline and a deadline deal.
Eric, I know you worked at the Washington Times, and, I've Googled you many times in all of your work back in the day when, Angelos was fighting with Major League Baseball and all the powers that be that brought the Nationals eventually to the nation's capital. I'm a Capitals fan, and this Barry Trotz departure is sort of weird in the aftermath, and, their first business move has been their coaches say goodbye. But I saw 500,000 people down there for a hockey parade. I know in your time there, the Redskins sort of owned the place, and the Nationals have been trying to get their footing and all of that. A couple of weeks from now, we're going to attend an all-star game down in Washington, D.C. for the first time since 1969, and that was supposed to be Baltimore's all-star game. I don't know if that's just going to get, pushed aside or, rubbed up nice here in Baltimore, but Baltimore's really a big loser in this summer, where this all-star game, probably last summer's all-star game, really would have been in Baltimore, but instead D.C.'s going to get that next month.
Yeah, actually, the 16 game in San Diego was the one that we all thought was going to Baltimore, and that San Diego would be a little down the line, and so on and so forth. So we're actually 2 years removed from when we thought we were going to be in Baltimore for All-Star. But the whole deal is different now. It's not AL/NL rotation. It's basically an open bid type of situation, like a Super Bowl. And so the only thing that alternates now is who has last stops and who is considered the quote-unquote home team. And this is another situation where even though the game's going to be in a National League park, the American League will be considered the home team, just as they were 2 years ago. But it's just an open bid type of situation now, where we've had a number of National League clubs in a row. It'll go to an American League club next year in Cleveland, but then we're probably going to start a series of National League again, because we've got the Dodgers the year after that, and probably the Cubs. That hasn't been officially named, but they've been pushing hard as well, and Wrigley Field's going to get one in the near future as well.
Well, when they get in on this, I mean, there's a lot of ancillary benefits to hotels and businesses and making money and flying the flag and being on national TV and being spotlighted. I think we can all agree the All-Star Game ain't what it used to be from the Midsummer Classic and all the tentacles of that, but certainly better to have one than not have one. And the other benefit, I think, from a club standpoint is selling tickets, right? Like buying season tickets so you can have access to All-Star Game tickets. All that's kind of real as well. I'm trying to figure out what we lost out on, so I'm going to go to Washington next month to try to figure that part of it out. But that is also part of the narrative here from the Baltimore perspective of something we lost.
Yeah, the rough baseline is somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $90 million in economic impact, and some people kind of poo-poo on those studies, but you're right. It is a real thing that it brings visitors to town that otherwise would be in some other locale somewhere else in the country. So it is a real thing, and that's why teams continue to fight for this thing, and people do want an all-star game. And even with 20 years of interleague play, you are correct. It's not like it was in the 70s and 80s, this game, but it's still by far competitively the best all-star game of any of the major sports, and it's a huge event. I think your point is very well taken that it's going to be a huge thing in Washington. It's going to be way more of a big deal than it was last year in Miami, which was really kind of sleepy locally. I mean, Aaron Judge put on a good show, but the local turnout, both in terms of ticket buying and local TV ratings and so forth. I mean, Miami just really didn't engage because of all the issues, obviously, with the prior ownership and Laurie and so forth. But it'll be a huge deal because, as we saw, and you correctly referenced with the Capitals as well, it's a great sports town, and there was a lot of years in my time there. It was all about loser town and these teams all stink and when's ever going to turn around. Well, we saw what happened once it turned around and people came out in droves. And yes, there's a lot of transient population there, but there's a lot of people there who have either are from there and are still there or were somewhere else and put roots down there and have stayed. And the numbers and what you saw with that Capitals run speaks for itself.
Well, I mean, look, man, you were down in D.C. covering all of this 15 years ago when D.C. was trying to get a team, a two-time failed market. There was always that belief in Baltimore, that arrogance of, well, Washington will never support a baseball team. Well, that's wrong. That's just wrong. I mean, maybe that was true in 1965. Maybe that was true in 1971. I don't know, but that's not true anymore. I mean, Washington is a much more desirable baseball place. And quite frankly, Eric, I am concerned about the future of the franchise here from a financial standpoint, from local businesses and industry here, and what will change the Orioles' fortune to make them more viable and make them more relevant and make people come out and support them financially. That is at the heart of my series this summer because they are at rock bottom and they can't afford to stay there for 10 years like they did last time.
Well, and part of the issue is, and I'm you've been dealing with this as well, part of the issue for them is who their divisional foes are. That, Washington's one thing being lumped in with the Mets and the Braves and the Phillies and so forth. It's quite another being lumped in a division with the two behemoths of the sport. And, for as long and until we get some sort of radical realignment or something changes along those lines, you'll be playing a quarter of your schedule against the Yankees and the Red Sox, and that's always going to create a series of comparisons in terms of economics, in terms of talent development, in terms of TV money and so forth. And it's not just the economic might among this thing that when you look at those two franchises, they're extraordinarily well run, both business side and baseball side. And on the baseball side, between Dombrowski and Brian Cashman, you're talking about two of the very best the sport has to offer. And the record speaks for itself that it's not just buying up talent, but you look at what they've done with Gleyber Torres and Mookie Betts and Aaron Judge and Jackie Bradley Jr. and so on and so forth, that there's now a continuum of talent there that every other team in the league, Baltimore included, obviously wants.
Well, it's no fun being in last place, I'll promise you that. And to your point, the Yankees and the Red Sox look very, very motivated and well-positioned financially, spiritually, within their fan base, within their brand, within their television deals, to put their foot down for a long period of time. So it's not a normal rebuild for the Orioles. It has to be supernatural in order to compete with these other teams.
Right, and that just, my point is just the degree of difficulty is so high there that, yes, they're in that cyclical thing, like I was saying at the outset, that they're in a similar situation like Kansas City is, and so on and so forth. But to have to compete against what Baltimore has to compete against, it really does enhance the difficulty of the job in front of them.
All right, last thing for you, off the baseball side, but onto the business side, because that's where you live and eat and breathe. You spent time with Manfred last week and the owners' meetings. What's on baseball's mind? What's baseball concerned about? Obviously, empty seats, which is an affliction the NFL's had, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. So they had this horrible start, as we all know. The weather everywhere across the Northeast and Midwest was terrible in April and early May. We had snowouts. We had entire weekend series wiped out all across the large sections of the country and so on and so forth. So they had this horrible start, record numbers of rainouts, and they went into early May down 7%. In attendance, which is huge because usually they're up or down in a lot of years by 0.5%, 1%, maybe 1/5. So to be down 7 is a huge deal. So now here we are into getting towards late June, and it's still 7%. They've stopped the bleeding, but the hole's not getting filled in. And so when I talk to Manfred, I see him every couple of weeks or so, and we talk in April, bad weather, bad weather, bad weather. See him again in May, same thing. Now we get to June, the weather's improved, but the hole's not getting filled in. And so now he's like, well, what else is going on here? Is there something going on here besides weather? And, that's what he said, and I reported that, and a lot of these things came back that, like, there's a lot of price sensitivity out there, and there's a lot of issue and a lot of losing markets, and Baltimore among them, and they've got this great kids promotion, but the numbers are still down. Numbers in Toronto are down huge because that team is now, they had a big run like Baltimore did, and now they're having to retrench a little bit. White Sox, similar sort of thing, except they never had the hide that the Orioles and the Blue Jays had. But there's a lot of these markets that these teams are at very low ebbs, and prices being what they are, they're just not having the draw that the sport would hope.
All right, man. Well, I'm going to be peaceful this summer to all my baseball friends because there's not much to talk about other than the dismantling of this and who's going to be running the show in the future and who's going to be the manager around here and where Machado is going to go. That's how we're piecing this thing together as we wait for football season around here. But I'm not going to let it rest, Eric. Last place in 20 and 50 and, and all these dangling parts and giving away Machado, it's not good enough, And as you know, asking the questions, sometimes you get the answer, sometimes you don't. But a lot of tough questions that need to be asked of the Orioles organization around here this summer. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Well, and you look at some of these other teams that have kind of come through on the other side, that you look at like a Houston Astros or Philadelphia 76ers in basketball, that they actually had like branding around the rebuild and the whole trust the process thing up the road from you and everything, and that there was a real transparency. Cubs did exactly the same thing, and it wasn't sloganized in the same way, but you had Ricketts out there at every opportunity, like selling the plan, like, here's what we want to do. It's going to take 3 years, but please buy into us. Please have the patience. And that's really going to be very interesting to see if the Orioles do this through this whole process. And to your point, who's going to be that guy, or who are going to be those guys to go out and evangelize the message? I think if there's a clearly articulated plan that is completely and repeatedly sold, I think there's going to be some buy-in, but you got to have some meat to it, and B, you have to have somebody with the patience and willingness to get out there repeatedly and beat the drum on that.
Eric Fisher is our guest. He is at Sports Business Journal. He's working hard for the money out there, doing all sorts of things in the Major League Baseball and the digital media and technology space for sportsbusinessjournal.com and SBJ. You can find him at Eric Fisher SBJ, and always enlightened on all things Masson and the Orioles and the Nationals. Do you expect any news on that in the next 90 to 180 days?
Maybe this fall, but nothing. I would say probably nothing before Labor Day.
Oh, it'll never end. It has forged our relationship. I always appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, man. Happy summer to you. Enjoy the World Cup.
And same to you. You
got it, Eric Fisher, SPJ, the way to follow him. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app, the buyatoyota.com audio vault there for anything you miss, when you want it, where you want it, how you want it, podcasted like the kids are doing. It's the buyatoyota.com audio vault. I'm giving away my Free the Birds shirts that I'm wearing on my Facebook Live and YouTube WNSTV channel on Thursday night. We'll be at Costas Inn, cracking crabs, watching the NBA draft. I know I said the NBA All-Star game. I'm nuts. The NBA draft, Thursday night. Costas, come on down. The Orioles will be playing the Nationals, too. And I'll be wearing my Cap Stanley Cup hat because it fits and feels right, even though Barry Trotz is left. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.